we're going to run with this.
All right. We're ready. Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. And my name is Frank Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the White Plains Youth Bureau. And I am happy to be before you this evening for our Keepers of the Dream speaking session. And our youth have been engaged with individuals across our country to speak to the issue of social justice, civil rights, and really looking at Dr. King's life and his dream to make our country better. And tonight we have an important and significant person whose contribution has been really important in terms of changing the narrative and bringing down the walls of Jim Crow and segregation. So before I proceed further, I just want to introduce our advisors. We have a lot of people who are working with our young people in various high schools and communities across our region, and they include I'm just going to name the advisors, Daniel Goldberg, Danny Bernstein, Howard Rosenstein, Wayne Francis, Fred Goldberg. New to us is Tricia Kushner and Liza Torres, and we also have Max Slater from Yorktown who's involved with us. And what we're trying to do is trying to inform, educate, and empower our young people to keep up the work that makes our country important and builds on the legacy of those pioneers who have given their life to make this country better. I am honored and privileged now to bring before you our Mayor, Mayor Tom Roach, who is actively part of our Keepers of the Dreams. When we started some time ago, the mayor would come and sit in and be a part of our conversations with our young people from all races, backgrounds, socioeconomic experiences to be engaged with them about and empowering them to speak up, speak out, and to serve our community. So Mayor Roach, welcome and good evening.
Well, good evening, Frank, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. And I want to thank Mr. Brown for his participation and for everything he's done for our country and continues to do by carrying his message to our young people. And we had a brief conversation before we came online here, and we were talking about the importance and really the honor and the privilege it is to hear history from a person who was part of that history. And I'm looking forward to hearing his story. I know that it starts out at the age of 16 when he committed himself to fighting the injustices that he had lived with his entire life, and took action at the young age of 16. For many of our young people on the call, they probably don't think 16 is young. We know it's very young. And to take a stand, not just for himself and not just for his people, but for our country, because the civil rights movement was an important factor in saving this country from itself. And that work has never ended. It continues now. We got a harsh reminder of that over the last few years. And we're getting back to work. But I think I really want to express my appreciation to Mr. Brown for doing this. And I hope we have a lot of young people on here to take advantage of it. I see we have a lot of participants. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
And Mayor, you want to introduce our other coming council member, John Kirkpatrick? I see he's here with us.
I see John Kirkpatrick, and let's see. I see our Commissioner of Recreation and Parks, Wayne Bass, and I do not. That's who I see from the city staff.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, John, and thank you, Wayne, for joining us this evening. Our Keepers of the Dream effort is led by some outstanding young people. And I'm going to ask Zeta Polanco and Sam Scafaldi to give us an overview of Keepers of the Dream. Sam and Zeta, you want to just give us a little bit of a perspective of Keepers of the Dream?
Yes, of course. Hi, everybody. My name is Zaida Polanco. I'm one of the lead youth organizers of Keepers of the Dream. I joined this club when I was around in eighth grade, and ever since then, I've been given the wonderful opportunity of contributing to insightful discussions on social injustice issues today and from the past. For years, Westchester students from all around the area have been gathering together to just talk about these prevalent issues. And I've learned a lot over these past few years from just being a part of this club. And even though we're on Zoom now, it's still really special every other Wednesday to get together with all these students, and just I learned something new every Wednesday. So I'm really thankful for this club.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna pass it over to Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so now Keepers of the Dream has meetings every other Wednesday. The group as a whole votes on what topic we'd like to discuss, and every other week we find what topic is most popular and we delve into it. And I'm just really proud of how passionate our community is. And I'm really happy that we are able to create this opportunity to hear from Mr. Brown and hear his story, because he is a testament to the history that we talk about, but don't always experience firsthand. I think this is a really great way to hear about it firsthand. So, yeah.
Thank you, Zaida, and thank you, Sam. We're going to see a short video now, and then following the video, Michael Waxman is going to introduce Mr. Levon Brown. So, Bobna, if you can, show the video. So we're working on the sound here, I see.
From the time of infancy, he has it pounded into him that he's not as good as other people. There are things he cannot do. Don't do this, you can't do this, you can't do the other. It builds into a man a feeling of inferiority, a feeling of frustration, a feeling of resentment.
James Farmer and CORE want Kennedy to understand that segregation stains America's image around the world. CORE wants to test the Supreme Court ruling, long ignored in the South, that bans segregation in interstate travel. The plan is for black and white volunteers to ride together on buses, journeys that CORE calls freedom rides. The riders commit themselves to nonviolence.
I want you to think it over very carefully, and if you
believing that challenging segregation peacefully will force the authorities to act.
We would be very happy to have you embark upon this dangerous, worthwhile, significant mission.
CORE prepares the riders for the racial hatred they can expect.
Hey, you, nigga. You hear what that man said? You hear what that man said? You get back there, get back there. Get back, get back, get back. Hey. Come on.
On May 4th, 1961, James Farmer leads 13 people, black and white, onto buses in Washington, D.C., bound for New Orleans. Ten days later, the bus enters Alabama, home to the largest KKK organization in America. They know the riders are coming. In Anniston, the Klan surrounds the bus, slashing its tires. Photographer Joe Postolione captures these images. The crippled Greyhound tries to escape, but a few miles out of town, the Klan surrounds and firebombs it, with the riders still inside. The Freedom Riders do escape the bus, only to be beaten by the Klan. Joe's photos bring the Freedom Rides to international attention.
So, so what you saw was a short video clip of the beginning journey of the Freedom Riders and their efforts to bring attention to the separation, segregation, and the barriers between whites and blacks and the issues of our time. Michael Waxman is going to introduce our speaker presenter, and Michael is also one of the leaders of our Keepers of the Dream. So Michael, if you would you introduce Mr. Brown?
Of course, thank you, Frank. It's my pleasure to introduce LaVon Brown. After graduating from high school in Jackson, Mississippi in 1961, Mr. Brown was arrested for asking to be served at Woolworth's department store. Soon after, Mr. Brown joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and registered Black people to vote in Mississippi. His efforts landed him in and out of jail, and he was once sentenced to 40 days hard labor at the Hines County Prison Farm. Mr. Brown, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we are so excited to hear your story.
Thank you. By the way, before I start talking about myself, is if you notice that with the guy in the film was Jim Farmer, who actually is, I forget the name of the movie, but he's in a movie where he was one of the debaters, and from the school that debated the Harvard Business School. So we were making tracks even back then. The other thing is that I no longer talk about Black history. I talk about history of America from a Black perspective. And I think that keeps people from running and hiding and saying it had nothing to do with me. It's all those Black people. It's all of us that are involved in the history of this country. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, because I think any question that gets asked, you have my permission to ask about anything you want. But I think it's important for people to understand that people came from all over and got involved, and their backgrounds were very different. So I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. I never got on a bus, but I did become a part of the movement that grew out of the Freedom Rides, and certainly supported what was going on. My father was kind of an abusive individual, so I left home when I was 16, and I was in high school at the time. I was almost thrown out of high school because I refused to go back home, because it just didn't make any more sense to me. It didn't make sense to me all along, but certainly once I left for good. Now, what's important is that I didn't have any clothing. I didn't have a place to stay. So I've stayed in some pretty interesting places for a lot of reasons. But I did manage the evening of graduation from high school. The principal told me that I could graduate, and he brought out the robe, whereupon I said basically what he could do with the robe. I took the diploma, and it turns out that my mother and her husband had come to graduation, and I handed her the diploma and I left. So that's how I guess life got started for me after high school. And I got a job in what we called an ice house, but it was an ice house, and attached to it was a place to buy, essentials, especially if you were going hunting or fishing. And so my job was, I didn't work in the ice house, I worked in the store. So my job was to, car hop and bring people stuff to their car that they had bought. And I bring that up because the man that owned the place, Jack McIntyre, I don't know why I still remember his name, but he owned the place where I worked. And occasionally his wife would come in. And because of his wife, I was not allowed to use the bathroom there because I was Black, and she didn't want to be in a bathroom where a Black guy had been. So I had to go and find a place that would take a black person. And when I wanted to go to the bathroom, I had to use that. And luckily there was one not too far away, so I used to walk to use the bathroom. I guess I was there. I finished high school in, I think, July. I know I got arrested a month later for the first time. And that was kind of interesting because between the time I finished high school and the first arrest, these two guys, James Bevel and Bernard Lafayette, who came out of Tennessee, were recruiting for people to become a part of the movement. And, I didn't have a place to live. So, it's important that I point out that we didn't have what we have today with news traveling as fast as it does, both real and unreal. But so I was not that enthused about the civil rights movement because I didn't plan on going anywhere. And most of the beginning of the freedom rides had to do with interstate travel. I was interested in it, but it didn't really move me. And then when Bevel and Lafayette came to got out of jail in Jackson, they would come to the place where I used to hang out, which was, we called a casino. I forget the real name, but a casino was good enough. And I would used to listen to them talk about, getting involved and being a freedom rider and all of that. And I really wasn't moved by it. I think that they impressed me, first of all, because they had come from far away. Tennessee was far away. And they kept talking about us getting involved. And I kept saying, I don't understand that. And the way they did the conversation was sort of, Bevel said to me, do you want to fight? And I was a very angry young man. And I was always ready to fight, even if a person was bigger than me, which Bevel was not. So I thought he meant him. And I had always learned from a friend of mine, hit first before the fight starts, because you don't know what's going to happen. So he almost got hit. And then Bernard pointed out that he was talking about going downtown and fighting the white guy. Made no sense to me because my feeling about fighting at all, if I was going to fight white people, it was in the dark or with a gun or both. So I had no intention of going downtown to fight. And then they really blew it because they started talking about nonviolence. And Bernard is nonviolent to this date. I'll state now that I'm nonviolent. I'm a lot less violent than I used to be, but I was nonviolent. I was willing to accept it as a tactic, not as a way of life. I was 16 and the only thing I knew was how to fight. Now I was very good in school, apparently. I didn't know that, but apparently I was. And I had a following somewhat because I used to help people do their homework and stuff like that. So one day they kept coming back to the casino and talking about being involved, and I kept listening and not doing anything. This guy, Jimmy Travis, was a friend of mine. We went to school together. And one day we were walking in downtown Jackson, and to explain downtown Jackson, first of all, it's not that big, or it wasn't. And we were not allowed a lot of things in downtown Jackson. For instance, we did not, for buying clothes, we couldn't try them on. So if you wanted to buy shoes or clothes or anything like that, you bought it and it was yours, but you did not try it on. So everything had to do by size or you had to fix it. So I very seldom, if ever, went downtown to buy anything. I would order from Sears, or at least my mother would. Or if I did buy something downtown, I had to give it to them to fix the clothing or make this pants shorter or whatever. So Jimmy and I are walking downtown, and we were always angry about what was going on in Jackson, but we knew that nothing was going to happen. Except for this day, it did. We were walking, and Jimmy said, or one of us said, I think it was Jimmy, let's go in. And we were at the Woolworths counter, and all of the drugstores had two parts. There was one part of it was for, buying supplies for school or what have you, and the other side was the restaurant. So we went into the restaurant, and we sat at the counter, and they told us that we had to leave because they couldn't serve us. And somehow or other, we had made up our mind that we were not going to do that. So then the manager came out and he told us to leave, and we would not. And they called the police. When the police came and they said we couldn't be served and we had to leave, we refused, we were arrested. And it didn't bother me particularly until we were at the jail. And I don't know if you've ever heard the sound of a jail door closing, but when that clanking noise came was the first time I got nervous. And I got nervous for two reasons. One is I didn't know what was going to happen, and nobody knew we were in jail. We didn't go and talk to people to tell them we were going to do that. We didn't even know. And fortunately, we made the newspaper, and they sent somebody to bail us out. And between then, before I got arrested, I had gone and applied for the Air Force because there was not much for a Black male especially, but I think both sexes, to do in the state of Mississippi. You clean houses, you taught. You might be a doctor, but there was only one of them. There was one lawyer. So I was going to join the Air Force like my brother did. And the interesting thing about that is the guy told me that I wasn't old enough because I was only 16, and he had to get my parents' permission. And when I told him I didn't live at home, he said I suddenly was 17 and ready to go. And so the arrest came after I joined the service. And when I went back to get called up, and I was going to be going to the Air Force, I was told I couldn't because I was a criminal. And I said, well, I got arrested for sitting on the white side of for sitting in a lunch counter. It didn't make a difference because I was arrested, it was a felony, and wasn't the type of person that they wanted. Now, I didn't know enough to know that that was the nature of America, but I thought it was just Southern whites who did this. So we got out of jail, went back to the SNCC office, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, where we were duly chastised for doing that and not telling anybody. Not for doing it, but for not telling anybody. When I heard the news from the Air Force that I was not going to be a member, I think it was at that point that I made a decision to be actively involved in the movement. So several things happened. We had a demonstration at the county fair because the way the fair was organized was, I think it was a week or maybe 2 weeks for white people to go, and then we had 3 days that we could go. And that didn't make any sense to any of us. So we organized a bunch of people to picket in front of the fair, and we organized to tell people not to go. And the police came, of course, and told us we had to move. And we were prepared for getting arrested. The police came, it took some of us away, and we had more people to go. And people, the boycott was semi-effective, but we was better than we thought and not as good as we wanted it. because that was really nothing else to do if you were Black in the state of Mississippi. You went to work, when the time for the fair came, even though it was white and Black, Black people wanted to do something. Now, that was not the attitude that I took then. It was like, why don't you people go home and not go to this fair? Remember, I'm 16, I'm mad, I'm righteous, I'm a whole bunch of things. So anything that Black people did not do, if they didn't do what we told them to do, we were angry. Now, that's a lot like I am today, actually. So we had a demonstration there. We went to the governor's mansion, and quick sidebar, at the reunion, the governor who was the governor of Mississippi at the time gave us a breakfast and a whole bit. So some people said, "Are you going?" And I said, "Well, of course I am. The last time I was here, I got tear gas, so of course I'm going for breakfast." Anyway, I did that. And then the other thing we did was, I was with my friend Jesse, and Diane Nash was there, and she got arrested for delinquency, juvenile delinquency, or what they didn't call it, we called me the juvenile. And she was arrested for corrupting the morals of a minor or something like that effect. So we went to her trial, and Jesse and I decided to sit on the white side of the courtroom, which we did, because having a white side and a colored side didn't make any sense to us. So we were of course arrested, and we sort of defended ourselves because we didn't have lawyers. So I asked the judge to leave the bench because he was technically the arresting officer, and he sentenced us to 30 days at $100 in the Hinds County Penal Farm, and I got a lecture that he didn't have to do anything I said. So the Hinds County Penal Farm, I just talk about briefly because it was a different kind of place than the county jail. The penal farm was run by one of the most sadistic people you've ever meet. And he had, it was sort of, I think the maximum amount of time was 2 years or something like that. And I got put on a road gang. And the first thing that happened was they had these long knives, I think they call it a scythe or whatever it was. And we were cutting grass on the side of the road, and my hand froze up because I wasn't used to that. And I stopped working, and the guard said, "Get back to work." And I tried to explain that my hands were hurting, and he said, "Get back to work again." I refused because I couldn't hold the blade anymore. So he had some of the guys, all black, hold me down while he beat me with this stick. And I got up, and he said, "Go back to work." And I explained again I couldn't. So I got another beating. And he turned around. He was so angry with me. And he just told everybody to sit down because what he said was, if this nigga's not going to work, nobody's going to work. So I thought that was great. You know, we got a rest break, the whole bit. I noticed that nobody was talking to me when we, during the trip or when we headed back to the house, the central place. And I realized that the man who ran it he had this strap, I forget what he called it, he had a name, and he used to take people down to the barn, and that's where they got their beatings at night. I, of course, was not looking forward to this. Fortunately, I didn't get a beating, but I didn't get any sleep either. So I could hear people screaming, and it was a horrible night. And I was awaiting my turn. Fortunately, it never came. I did a lot there to educate people. I did not disavow knowledge of the movement or who I was. So they asked me to speak at the church. And one of the things that you ought to be aware of now is that there's always somebody who will tell the man what he wants to know. So I was afraid to go into the church and say everything I wanted to say, but I did say enough so that people understood that he was somebody who was a little bit crazy, but different. And, I left the church thinking I'm in deep trouble. Nobody said anything. And I think they had the word that we were not to be beaten or abused in that way. So we went back out on the road. I got the same guard. So he says something, and I was really unfocused on him. I was focused on what I was doing. So he said, "Brown," and I said, "What?" And the next thing I know, there's a 45 pointing right in my face, and the guy is, he told me, he says, "I will kill you." And I just stood there, and I don't know, I went into shock. Something happened, and I noticed that his hand was shaking, and I said, "Oh my God, this is the first time he's killed anybody. This is what's going through my head." Eventually, he lowered the gun, the pistol, put it in his scabbard, and he just went on. From that day forward, he was advising me that I needed to calm down and I needed to stop this freedom stuff, that people were trying to get me killed, and on and on. And I ended up one day actually left alone while he and the rest of the crew went somewhere else. I mean, they were way up the road, and I couldn't figure out. I says, he wants me to run, or I don't know what it was. All I know is he left, and he talked to me the whole while I was in jail. And then we did a lot of other stuff because I found all about how they use prisoners to work on private farms. I did that. So 42 days later, they were able to pay the bond, and I got out. Now, as soon as I got out, we filed a suit that for being arrested. Well, that made people kind of mad back at the farm. And one day I ran into a prisoner who had been there, and he explained to me that they had let this guy out. There was a gentleman on the farm who tried to escape. They caught him, and they had him in chains, and they had made a deal with him that if he killed the people that were locked up in jail or whatever he was supposed to do, they would cut time off his sentence. And when I ran into somebody who was in the jail, they told me about this. And basically all they could do was just say, "Watch yourself," because they've let this guy out to do this to you. So anyway, a whole bunch of things happened in Jackson. And then what's important is that all of that was direct action that we did. And we did a lot of it. And then the voter registration piece kicked off because I like to say we, but basically people smarter than me figured out that if we didn't do that, then everything we did was in vain, because that they could handle, but the voter registration meant power, just like it does now. And we started doing a voter registration drive, and I was sent along with Lawrence Guyot, who was a friend of mine, up to Greenwood, Mississippi. Greenwood is still a place I don't want to go to, but we went. And there was a guy there from the NAACP, Sam Block, and Guyot and I went to work with him. And the idea behind voter registration was, one, of course, we were going to get people registered to vote, but the other was that we had to show people that we were not afraid. So we had to be on the street every day. And we had to explain the poll tax, which is basically you paid $2 to register to vote. And then they had the literacy test, which could be a question from the Constitution of the state of Mississippi, could be something they made up, like how many bubbles in a bar of soap. It didn't matter. The idea was to keep Black people from voting. So our job was to get people to vote. And again, that anger reared its ugly head because people didn't want to go do that. And I finally understood that going to vote or even talking to us could get people's jobs lost or their family hurt or any number of things that could happen to them. So I understand now more than I did then. But I understand, my thinking was nothing's going to change if you don't. Again, I'm 16, so I don't think about dying or any of that. I just think about what we were doing. So we went around every day trying to get people to register to vote, and we took a few. Well, we're in the office one night. We found a guy that would rent us an office. So we were in the office one night, actually the three of us, and a car pulled in front of the place where we were, and Sam actually turned off the lights because we knew we figured we were in trouble. And then the police came by slowly. They were looking. And then this car came again, and we knew we were in trouble. Now, the only way out of the office we were in was where they were. So we climbed out on the roof, and lo and behold, there was no way to get down to the 2 floors to the ground. So we used I don't think they have them anymore, but it was a TV antenna in the ground. So we grabbed that and we jumped. And Sam sort of hurt his ankle, and we took off running, and there was this Black gentleman approaching us, and there was a quick conversation about what are we going to do about him. And you said, well, there's a Black guy. The problem was that we knew that either he would voluntarily tell the way we went, or they would beat it out of him. Either way, we had to do something. So one of us hit the guy and knocked him down. We tried not to hurt him too much, but he didn't know. Let me put it this way: if they were asking him which way we went, he couldn't tell them. So we went to the place where we were staying, and then people came down the next day. By Moses, a whole bunch of people came down to look at the office, and the office was a mess. They had searched the office, and we were, of course, afraid that they were going to find out who had signed up and who hadn't. Turned out we don't know whether they got names or not, but the people became more afraid once they found out the office had been broken into. So we went to the house where we stayed. That night, we went somewhere else, and we were staying in a house that had multiple renters, and mainly I think they were teachers, they were whatever. And the Klan came, but they didn't know which room we were in. And remember that the nonviolence was tactical. So I started looking for a weapon, and we all did, to be honest, because we knew that if they found out where we were gone. So they kept screaming outside. I don't know how many there were because we didn't look. We found a few things laying around that we could use as weapons, and eventually they went away. And I think it was simply because they couldn't tell what room we were in. And I think the other part of it was that there weren't that many of them. And I remember that we had to be there. So the next day we went back to the office, and from then on we worked this, that's where we were. We were in Greenwood. Sam got beat up a lot in Greenwood because he was just who he was. We supported him, but he just had a mouth on him that wouldn't quit. We had a few people in the movement like that. And so Sam got hit quite a bit. But we did get a few people to register to vote. Um, so that basically is the picture. Then we had the food drive, and there's actually a historian writing stuff about Dick Gregory, who started the clothes drive, and we had that because what they did in Lafleur County, which is where Greenwood is there was a food and program run by the state, and it was the food they got from the federal government, and they would pass it out, and they were so angry that they stopped feeding everybody, white and black, and people had no jobs. They had so we had a food drive up in Greenwood, and the Teamsters volunteered to bring the food in trucks, and Dick Gregory and Marlon Brando and people like that. I mean, I didn't know any of these people. I got to meet Dick Gregory later, but I didn't know then who was doing it. But we were able to do it. And the thing that I bring that up mainly to tell you, we were giving out clothes and food, and one day this white family came to the truck, and we had a discussion inside about were we going to give them anything. And I think at that point, I like to say that there was sort of an awakening in me that, of course, we had to help them out. They were not the ones who were killing us, and they were not the ones who were trying to keep us from voting. So why not? Now, I would like to say that I had a great love for everybody, but I didn't. I mean, I grew up in Mississippi. I grew up, white people abusing black people. So it was not that, but it was the right thing to do. So we gave them whatever they had to do, whatever we had that would fit them, and we gave them food. And so I stayed in Greenwood, I don't know for how long, and then I went back to Jackson. I did stuff around the state and with SNCC. And then I came to Chicago, and I got involved in politics in Chicago, but mainly I did a lot of speaking. When they had the convention, I went to the convention. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'd been in an accident coming from a SNCC meeting. So I was in what's called a Minerva jacket, which is a cast that sort of covers the whole top of your body. And I went to the Democratic convention, and fortunately I had my cast on, and so that when the police came out and beat people, it was okay because they couldn't find a place to hit me that would hurt. So anyway, I got very involved in Chicago in the movement and in raising money and in training people actually for going to Mississippi. And then the March on Washington came, so we all went to DC to do the March on Washington. Now the part they don't show in the March on Washington was those of us who stayed got in trouble in Washington, so we got tear gassed in Washington. I joined CORE for a while back in New York. They call it the River Rats. And I became friends with a few of the people. That's where I met Bayard Rustin. And to this day, I was very glad to see that they're going to make a movie out of Bayard's life, because that was somebody that did so much for the movement, and he gets so little credit. And I think he gets the credit because he doesn't get credit because he was gay. But now people are starting to realize that it doesn't matter. What he did was important with the sleeping car porters and with the movement. And so fortunately, he's going to get the credit now that he should have gotten. Jimmy, who was our muse, James Baldwin, who was the writer, unfortunately had to go live in Paris, but he was another one. He was like our muse. He could say things with an eloquence that we couldn't. So people like that, when we used to think that we didn't have any help, we had no background, we had a lot of people who helped us do what we needed to do. And I think that's what I try to do now. I've been on the school board. I think some of you heard me say earlier that Facing History, I was a member of their speaking bureau. I still am. I had a stroke about 3.5 years ago. So, and with the coronavirus, we don't go anywhere anyway. But I have gone to schools that were predominantly Chinese, predominantly white. I've been all over. I've been in where they had young people stay in jail. So I think it's my job to aid and abet. And I'm not going to the ramparts anymore, but I do that. So I don't know if I've talked for 30 minutes, but I'm going to stop and just let you ask questions because sometimes things just come out.
Let's give Mr. Brown a big hand, and Michael, Zaida, and Sam are going to facilitate. So take it and run with it, guys.
Thank you, Levon. Thank you so much. So the way we're going to do this is if you have a question, you could just do the hand raising feature, and then we'll just go in order of who has a question.
You can also type it in the chat.
Or you
if
can
get
type it.
more comfortable with that.
Well, I've got a question, if that's all right with everyone.
Sure.
My question was, you were so young, you were 16, yet you were putting your life on the line constantly. What was driving you? Was it hate, anger, frustration, or was it a hope for the future? What was your main source of motivation to do what you did?
I don't know that I thought about it a lot. One of the things that always impressed me was the number of people that came into Jackson, especially, but Mississippi in general, from somewhere else. So I think that was part of it. That got me going because I appreciated that. I was very glad that people came. I think for the longest time, I was angry about what was going on in the state, but I was also hopeful that we would be noticed by America. And I was kind of silly about that, but I really believe that what we were doing would be noticed because we got started like that. The only reason the Freedom Riders were let into the state of Mississippi and didn't get beat up in the state of Mississippi was because the Russians embarrassed the Kennedys by saying that you're telling us how we should treat people, and you got people getting beat up and killed. So we figured, we have support. And we did after a fashion, but I think the anger went away, and it was just a matter of I wanted things to change. It was unfair the way we were treated. And I believed anyway that the North, I call this the North, New York, Chicago was different. And it was in a way. It wasn't in a lot of ways that mattered. So I think that I was fed by a desire to change things and the anger that I felt growing up the way I did.
Mark, do you have a question?
I do, thank you. Could you follow up on that when you came up north? How did you see it differently, and how did you see it the same?
Well, when I went to Chicago, that was the first place I went. I went to Chicago, which is west. It's not really the north. But I went to, and I noticed that the neighborhoods in Chicago were separate and apart. That the Black people, the Mexicans lived in one place and white people lived somewhere else. I noticed that the near north side of Chicago, Black people didn't go. And if they did go, they got beat up. So I started to notice quite a bit went on. I noticed that the alderman, which is the structure, the political structure that they have in Chicago, was as crooked as the day is long, and that the Black people were basically used to provide votes for the daily machine. So there was a lot that I saw that I wasn't afraid of getting beat up if I didn't go to certain neighborhoods, but it was certainly separate. The first thing I saw when I went to New York, I almost left actually because it was so cold. But you know the habit that they used to have in bars and stuff where you would order a drink and then the bartender would break the glass. And I saw that. A guy came in the bar, black man. He had a drink because they had to serve him. That was the law. They served him, and when he left, they broke the glass that he drank out of. So that started to tell me that the North was different in some ways. It was the same in others.
Thank you. Have you returned to Mississippi at all in the intervening years?
I did. Well, it took a while. I went back once for the high school reunion. Unfortunately, I didn't remember most of the people. I mean, I remember the faces, but I didn't remember the names. I went back for that. I went back when they had the SNCC reunion, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and we got the governor involved and the whole bit. So I went back for that. And I went back for the SNCC reunion and for the core reunion. And things had changed. We visited a lot of the people, a lot of the places where the writers went. We went to where Emmett Till was killed. We went to Rouville, where Mrs. Hamer was from. We went to the state prison. And it was interesting because the people who ran the state prison, the guy was black. But that's where they put a lot of the Freedom Riders in Parchman Penitentiary, which is the state prison system. And they put them in death row, where they used to put people before they went into the gas chamber. Now, it was the old death row, so there was they were not going to kill them, but the cells are small, and they put a lot of people in there. So I've been back a few times. I went back once, and I called I formed some strange friendships in Mississippi. One was the chief of police in Jackson. I got to know him fairly well, and once he picked me up, and I was with this white girl, which to this day I don't know why I did that, but we went walking toward the city of Jackson, and I got arrested, and so did she. We got picked up. Fortunately didn't file any charges, and I ended up talking to him, and I had never seen him hit anybody. I'd never seen him beat anybody, and we started talking, and his point was, I'm a member of the police department and I enforce the law. And if the law changes, I'll change. What's interesting is he did. So anyway, I called him when I was going back to visit my mother, and I told him I was coming to Jackson. He said, no problem, nobody will bother you. You come, you visit, you leave. Because I went to Greenwood, he didn't tell me that I could go there, but I went there. But that was the first time I was back. I went to visit my mother.
I guess we could just go down the line here. I think Zada's first.
Actually, I think Jack raised his hand first.
Jack.
How do you raise your hand?
Raise your hand. Well, that's true. You can't.
You have to, there's a reaction button on the bottom, and when you press that, there should be like a little icon for a hand.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Jack, do you want to go, or do you want me to start?
For sure, I can speak to.
Okay.
I was going to ask about. So I appreciated your North-South comparison, because you said that, the North was different in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways that mattered, it was the same. And I think that, like, strangely, a lot of folks would do a similar comparison between then and now, right? Comparing the time scale. Could you kind of compare what you see now in the world regarding these issues and then what you saw then?
Well, it depends on where you are. I think we're at a place now in history where everybody's trying to find their own corner. I think that there are places like I live in Greenburgh in New York. And I would recommend it for anybody, black or white. And I happen to think that we have a fairly decent police force. If you went 15 minutes from here, I would tell you no. Now, you're not going to get thrown in jail most times, but you will not be welcomed. So it depends on where you are. I think what's happening now, even though we have the pandemic and all of that, when we're fighting a lot of the same battles we fought. The Republicans are busy now redistricting, and just another way of suppressing votes is what they're doing. So we're fighting a lot of the same battles. We're just fighting them differently. We are still killing a lot of black men, but we're not killing as many as we used to, and we're not killing as many as they do in Alabama, Mississippi, and places like that. So in that sense, it's different. If you look at the march that was going on, the Black Lives Matter marches, if you looked at those marches, you saw white people, black people, red people, yellow people, you saw all kinds of people, and they were together all over the world. You didn't see that before now. And I think that people are beginning to learn the history of what goes on in this country, that the kids, the white kids, especially of today, don't exactly accept all that happens. And they feel that they've been, some of them, not all of them, they've been hoodwinked as well. So it's a difficult question to answer because we have to see what happens next. But I certainly know that voter suppressing is happening. I know that the voter laws are just like the poll tax and that kind of stuff that was going on. Everybody makes it sound like a voter ID is a good thing. Well, if it's so good, I have a Social Security card. I had a Social Security number when I was born. I don't have a voter registration card. So they don't, obviously it's not as simple as they make it sound. They want people to get the card because they know that that will rule out a certain number of people. They know that redistricting will rule out a certain number of people. So all of this is about keeping people who might vote Democratic from voting. That's really all it's about. So we're fighting a lot of the same battles. You can go and eat where you want. You can, as long as you're not in certain towns in Mississippi, you can do that. In New York, I can go anywhere I want. I might not feel as welcome in some of the stores because a black man walks in the store, depends on which one it is, they might be following you with their eyes, making sure you don't steal anything. So there's a lot going on and there's a lot we have to face. But my hope is when I see people like I saw doing all the marching, I'm hopeful that the young people will change things.
Given today's changing political climate, do you have any advice to give us youth in regards to persevering through these challenges?
Yeah, duck. No, yeah. I think you do. You recognize sort of, the first thing is to recognize what's happening. So a lot of people was upset and focused on Donald Trump. And meanwhile, Rich McConnell was doing what he wanted to do. And lo and behold, we have X number of judges who are Republican and on his side. And a Republican is not bad, but people who are Trumpers are. And so there's a lot that happens that we don't pay attention to. This is how a lot of white kids have been fed the wrong thing. They've been told that everything was fine and Obama, we're still paying for Obama, by the way, black people. And anybody that's a good, that thinks things ought to change. Anybody like that, we're paying for Obama. That's what this is all about. I think you fight the way you can, when you can, and the way you can. And the attitude has to be, I'm going to change things. Change things does not necessarily mean marching. It may mean something as simple as putting your arm around somebody.
I don't know. I knew it. I just didn't focus. I was so busy trying to get it. But he was one of the writers.
What happened? Are we still there? No.
Everybody make sure that they're muted.
You're going to continue, Levon.
Yeah. So it doesn't mean doing big things. It means doing a lot of little things also. If you see a Black person, don't necessarily assume that it's anything other than a difference in skin color. He doesn't have to be doing anything. If you see a friend of yours being picked on, maybe just walk up and put your arm around them and say, I'm with this person. It's simple things that we can do that change things. Political climate, vote. Tell other people to vote. The reason this election was so big was because people were paying attention. I don't talk to people that don't vote, incidentally. It's a thing that I have. I don't care what color they are, I don't talk to them because I almost got killed getting Black people the right to vote. So I don't talk to them. If they didn't vote, they got one. But you grow up with the attitude that I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote what I believe. I'm going to do that. I'm going to eat where I want to eat. And I'm not going to judge people simply because they're different than I am. And you'll be amazed at what that changes. You see that woman, that story that was going around with the woman in Central Park, with the guy that was a bird watcher? Well, there was a guy, a Black man, who happened to be a bird watcher. There was a woman in Central Park in New York with her dog. And she called the police on him. And just to make sure that the policeman came, it wasn't the fact that she called the police, it was the fact that her tone changed. Because she knew if she said in a certain way that the police would worse and attack the Black guy. That was her whole purpose. So simply not doing that might make a difference. Now, he's a lot more calm than I am because he's now saying she shouldn't be arrested. They fired her that day, by the way. But her whole thinking, that she grew up with the thought that I am a white woman, that is a Black man, it doesn't matter what I say. And in some cases, she might be right. So just not doing that might make a difference. Not shooting the guy because he's running down the street with running clothes on. Making sure that doesn't happen. That changes things a lot.
Thank you.
I see someone else with their hand raised, with their hand icon, Cider.
Hi, yeah. Since your involvement in the civil rights movement up until now, how has your attitude towards American government and politics changed?
I just finished this book called Caste, and it talks about why people act the way they do. I think that government it's a mixed bag. You have some people, first of all, they all believe, every politician believes in the system that we have. So we start there. They just think it ought to be different, and some of them think they ought to treat people differently. I don't trust it because what just happened was not just an individual that did it. Why would anybody ever question when you had an insurrection? Yet you have many people who do. So I think that people have to pay more attention than they have been paying. And I think that the government, there are a few people in government who are good people, who mean well. There are a lot of people who do not. Now, I don't mind saying that I'll go with the Democrats because there's kind of the messy bunch. Some of them are more radical than others, and some of them want to change things and some of them don't, but they all believe in the system of government that we have. So if you believe in that, pay attention. Get the people elected who will change things. Because as soon as this bunch got in, all of a sudden the voting right law would change. Things just started changing. We've started putting kids in cages. There's a problem that needs to be solved about immigration, but the solutions that we came up with were ridiculous. So I don't trust the government because the government trusts itself. Does that make any sense? So I am always paying attention to what the government is doing and how it's doing it. So I think there's some good people in government. I think that, they're trying to forge ahead, but, we'll see.
Before we take any more in-person questions, there are a few questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to. Dewitt Smith asks, did your parents or relatives encourage you to be involved in this movement?
Quite the contrary. My father, which I explained up front, I had nothing to do with. He's dead now, and when I left home, I left because of him. So I didn't expect an encouragement from him. From my mother, my grandmother. My mother I didn't talk to too much. My grandmother, who was really my favorite, she was afraid for me because she lived about 40, 50 miles from Jackson. And a lot of the white people who lived in that area didn't approve of us at all. So I didn't get a lot of support. My sisters and brothers, yes. As much as they understood, and they to this day they do. So my family did not, but not my immediate family anyway. But I'm sorry, for different reasons.
Thank you. Sophia asks, how did you justify the decisions and feelings of your peers who weren't hungry for change and who weren't willing to put their lives on the line? And was there a need for justification?
What's the question again? How did I justify?
Were you able to justify the decisions and feelings of your peers who decided not to fight for change?
It wasn't a matter of justifying what they did. It was those who wanted to fight did, and those who didn't, I didn't really have much to do with. Some of them were supported it, some didn't. I think that a lot of it was ignorance, that they didn't quite understand what we were trying to do. And I think a lot of it was fear that they would lose their place, whatever it was that they had earned, the ones who were becoming teachers or policemen or whatever. So I just did not, and I don't to this day, I have much to say or do with them. But as long as they didn't get in the way of it, as long as they didn't disapprove, that was enough for me.
Does anyone have any final questions for Mr. Brown?
I have a question.
Great.
Good evening, everyone. Excuse my my speech. I just came from the dentist. My mouth is still numb, so I'm speaking a little off right now. My question is, sir, when you look back on your life, the sacrifices that you've made in your involvement in the civil rights movement, did you or could you imagine that we would be continuing to fight for these same rights in 2021?
The answer is no. It was, I thought When I was involved, and well, not I, but all of us believed that the country would change. Uh, that the time that we were putting in would be rewarded. I no longer believe that. I think we have to keep fighting. I think that we stopped just a little bit too soon. I think that the people that you see now fighting so much to keep people from voting or showing prejudice against people because they're gay or they're this. I think that we could have stopped all of that if we'd kept going. The problem was we defined the problem from a narrow perspective. In other words, we thought if we went to the convention in Chicago in 1964, I guess, no, 64, whatever it was, and we got them to unseat the Mississippi delegation, and we did stuff in Alabama. We thought we were changing things. Well, we come to find out that they are arresting as many people in Alabama as they used to. They still needed workers. They needed people to work for small amounts of money. So we have to keep fighting. You will notice that people died in the history of this country. Whether it was Malcolm X, who came back from Mecca and said, shucks, I got it wrong. It's everybody. Well, they killed him. If they did the same thing with Bobby Kennedy, they did the same thing with Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King was starting to talk about the Poor People's March and building houses in Washington and all that stuff. Well, he had to go. So there's a lot that needs to be done. And at some point, the other thing, the reason I thought of the book about caste was a lot of the people who are opposed to what people are doing now, the American Indian, the Black man, white people of conscience. And the reason a lot of that's going on is because basically it's the way the country is formatted. So the Italians, I couldn't imagine an Italian disliking somebody because they're Black. Now, when I go to Italy, I don't have that problem. The reason I have it here is because the Italians wanted to move up. And to move up, they had to be like the white man. A lot of the Jewish people who are in the South, you don't know, well, you didn't know, because they were Jewish and they didn't want anybody to know that. I was in a synagogue once and I was speaking about, people asked me, well, what did you think of the Jewish people in Jackson? Well, it turns out there's quite a few, but to me, they were all white people and they didn't say any different. Why? Because they wanted to survive. So I think that's what's going on, is that everybody thinks that the only way to do things is to be like the white man. And when I say the white man, it's like, you know, you look at the wealth and whatever in this country, it's white men. The other problem is that they see the same statistics, which says, you know, in a few years, 10 years, maybe 15 years, that this will be such a mixed country that they will not be the majority anymore. So what happens then? They believe that we will do what they did. Well, that's not true, but that's what they believe. So they have to fight now. That's what all this is about, I believe. I could be dead wrong, but I believe that.
We're going to end with that. We're going to thank Mr. Brown and thank our youth leaders and Sam and Michael and Zaida. And we thank all of you for joining us this evening. This whole presentation is recorded. You can either leave your email in the chat box or call us here at the Youth Bureau, and we will make sure that you get a copy of it. And again, we thank Mr. Levon Brown for his inspiration and perspiration, and for being an example of someone who engaged the community building trying to make a difference in our country, and because of him and others, while we are in a moment of challenge, we're not where we were. We still have a lot more work to do. And we thank him for his life and his legacy and his contribution to our country. Thank you again, Mr. Brown, and best to you and your family. And thanks
you for
all of
having
you.
me. And
I'm sorry.
we're looking at our future.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, again, for all of the young people who are part of this evening's conversation, you know, really is the future is in your hands. This country will be what you put into it. Your investment in change begins and ends with you. So we want you to know that you matter. And like Mr. Brown, when he was 16 years of age, he had no fear. Maybe I shouldn't say that. He recognized the importance of standing and making a difference. So again, Mr. Brown, thank you. And thanks all of you for joining us. On March 16th or 18th, somewhere in the middle of March, we're going to have another presentation around the issues that will help us to make a difference in our community. So thank you again, and be well and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks for having me.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you so
Very
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.